Listen closely, not because what you're about to hear will soothe you, but because it may unsettle something you've been avoiding. This message isn't designed to make you feel chosen, admired, or reassured. It exists to confront you with a truth most people never articulate out loud. The moment a man realizes that your dignity outweighs your love for him, something irreversible happens inside his mind. Not tender, not romantic, devastating. Because in that instant, he doesn't just lose affection, he loses position. This is not about walking away. It's not about ultimatums or dramatic exits. The real shift happens long before distance appears. It begins the moment you stop negotiating with yourself in order to keep the bond intact. And when that internal alignment locks into place, the dynamic between you changes permanently, whether either of you speaks about it or not. What you're about to hear is not comforting. It is clarifying. Because when dignity enters a relationship as a lived reality, rather than a concept, the psychological balance rearranges itself from the inside out. And once that happens, neither of you can return to what was before. Carl Jung warned that every deep encounter between two people is also a confrontation with the self, especially the parts we've avoided seeing. Your dignity forces that confrontation, not by accusation, not by control, but by presence. And presence, when it is no longer pliable, exposes everything. The first rupture doesn't look like a rupture at all. There's no argument, no boundary announcement, no emotional declaration. Instead, something subtler occurs, and it's precisely this subtlety that makes it so powerful. A man does not realize he's losing you when you leave. He realizes it when he can no longer move you internally. When your emotional center stops adjusting itself around his behavior, he feels it immediately. Even if he can't name it, your energy no longer leans. Your responses no longer soften themselves to preserve harmony. Your silence carries weight instead of longing. And suddenly, the familiar map he's been using to navigate you no longer works. Let me ground this in something real. A woman once described her relationship as calm, mature, and loving. From the outside, it looked stable. She didn't chase. She didn't demand. She didn't create scenes. People admired her composure and called it dignity. But inside, something else was happening. She was constantly adjusting, waiting longer than felt right, justifying absences, swallowing discomfort to avoid being too much. She confused patience with depth, adaptation with love. Over time, that inner stretching taught both her nervous system and his that her boundaries were flexible, indefinitely. Not because he was cruel, but because the dynamic allowed it. There was no urgency to realign when she always found a way to accommodate. No need to rise when the structure never demanded it. Then one day, without warning or announcement, she stopped betraying herself in small ways. She didn't leave. She didn't threaten. She didn't withdraw affection. She simply stopped explaining what didn't feel right. She stopped overriding her own signals to preserve emotional comfort. And that internal movement, invisible to anyone watching, triggered the first true destabilization in his mind. This is where most people misunderstand power. Dignity is not hardness. It's not distance. It's coherence, sustained over time. When you return to yourself, your energy stops pleading. It stops shaping itself to prevent loss. And that absence of inner negotiation feels like a sudden loss of access. His first reaction is not fear. It's disorientation. Something no longer responds the way it used to. Your presence doesn't invite the same ease. Your boundaries don't sound defensive. They sound settled. Your availability is no longer assumed. And because he can no longer regulate himself through your emotional elasticity, he's forced to reposition internally. Jung would call this the activation of the shadow. Not dominance, but the loss of emotional leverage. He doesn't think, "I'm losing her." He thinks something more unsettling. "I no longer understand where I stand." Before, if you pulled away, he lost proximity. Now, when you pull inward, he loses orientation. Love can be replaced. Comfort can be rebuilt. But embodied dignity cannot be negotiated once it's integrated. And that's what makes this moment so destabilizing. This shift doesn't happen because you changed your behavior to provoke a reaction. It happens because you stop changing yourself to maintain connection. You no longer stay where your body tightens. You no longer explain yourself to someone who isn't meeting you with equal presence. You begin making small, aligned decisions, not to punish, but to respect yourself. That's when the fantasy breaks. The unspoken certainty that you'll always bend, always adjust, always remain emotionally reachable, begins to dissolve. And when that certainty falls, his mind enters alert mode, not romantic longing, not devotion, reorganization, because no one truly values what feels unconditional. But everyone respects what has quiet structure. Structure doesn't beg. It doesn't demand. It simply exists. And structure orders more than any declaration of love ever could. You stop reacting. You start choosing. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Consistently. And this consistency without explanation disarms any dynamic built on convenience. This is the moment psychological respect begins, not because you became distant, but because you became whole. You're no longer an emotional response waiting to be activated. You're a presence that cannot be bypassed. And once your system learns it no longer needs to tense itself in order to love, it cannot unlearn that truth. He feels it, even if he never names it. Something essential has changed. He can no longer rely on your flexibility to stay the same. He must either grow into alignment or retreat into familiarity. Hold this sentence carefully, because it shifts everything. You do not need to leave to stop being negotiable. You need to return to yourself. When that happens, the bond no longer sustains itself through inertia. And without realizing it, he begins comparing, not to who you were before, but to every other connection that lacks this level of coherence. That's when you stop being a memory and become a reference. And from here, the inner game deepens, because dignity does something love alone never could. It introduces consequence without punishment, presence without pursuit, and respect without negotiation. In the next part, we'll step into the moment most people misunderstand. Why dignity activates more respect than all the love you've ever given, and why this realization both hurts and liberates at the same time. There is a moment that arrives quietly, without drama, without confrontation. Yet it rearranges the entire inner architecture of a man's perception. It is the moment he realizes that your dignity commands more respect than all the love you once poured into him. And this realization is not gentle. It stings, because it exposes something uncomfortable. Love without structure never required him to rise. Love, when it lacks inner contour, becomes landscape. It surrounds, supports, forgives, absorbs. It feels warm, familiar, safe. But it does not organize. It does not demand presence. It does not require evolution. Over time, it becomes background, not because it is unworthy, but because it is endlessly available. Dignity is different. Dignity introduces form, not through punishment or withdrawal, but through coherence. When you love without abandoning yourself, When your care does not come at the cost of your inner alignment, something shifts in the way you are perceived. He can no longer read you from a place of comfort. He has to orient himself in relation to you. This is where many women are misled. They are taught, subtly and persistently, that giving more love will eventually inspire commitment, that patience will be rewarded, that understanding will soften avoidance. But love alone, when unstructured, creates habit, not devotion. It teaches the nervous system that nothing essential is required to remain connected. Dignity introduces a new variable, consequence without threat. Not consequence imposed from the outside, but consequence arising naturally from self-respect. Jung spoke often about the psyche's relationship to boundaries. The psyche respects what has contour. It responds to what cannot be crossed without transformation. When your inner boundaries become stable, something in him recognizes that access to you is no longer automatic. He cannot simply drift and remain connected. He cannot remain unchanged and still belong. And this realization activates respect before it ever activates desire. At this stage, an unconscious comparison begins. He doesn't articulate it. He doesn't analyze it. He feels it. Your present presence compared to the earlier version of you who adapted. Your calm compared to your former waiting. Your groundedness compared to your previous emotional availability. And this comparison unsettles him because what once felt guaranteed now feels conditional, not on performance, but on integrity. This is where the male mind enters evaluation mode, not romantic evaluation, strategic evaluation. A quiet question emerges beneath the surface. Do I rise or do I lose this position? This is not manipulation. Manipulation requires intention and performance. What you are doing now requires neither. You are not changing yourself to provoke a response. You are returning to coherence with yourself, and coherence has a frequency that cannot be imitated. It is felt immediately. Your energy no longer pushes, explains, or adapts. It simply stands. And this stillness destabilizes more than any argument ever could, because he can no longer rely on your emotional flexibility to remain exactly as he is. In counseling rooms, this moment often surfaces as confusion. I don't know what's happening, he says. She feels different. Different is the word people use when their old reference point disappears. What he means is, it used to be easier. Easier to be inconsistent. Easier to delay. Easier to remain undefined. Easy is not love. Easy is access without consequence. And when that access is gone, something new enters the field. Attention. Not always mature. Not always healthy. But real. Because your dignity has forced his system to wake up. Not from fear of losing you physically, but from the discomfort of losing an inner place that once felt secure, without effort. This is where the dynamic becomes fragile. When he begins approaching differently, more attentively, more carefully, the temptation arises to soften again, to reassure, to give more, to return to what felt familiar. This is the critical crossroads. If dignity is used as a strategy, it collapses here. But if dignity is lived as identity, it deepens. Jung would describe this as the moment when projection dissolves and conscious choice becomes possible. Before, the bond was sustained by unconscious roles, the giver and the receiver, the stabilizer and the drifter. Now those roles no longer function. Something more honest is required. Your dignity does not guarantee that he stays. It guarantees something more essential, that you do not abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And paradoxically, this is what has the greatest psychological impact, because you are no longer moving from fear of loss. You are moving from respect for your own axis. This shifts the balance completely. He is no longer the evaluator. He is the one being evaluated, not consciously by you, but existentially by the bond itself. Can he meet the level of coherence you embody without announcement? Can he remain present without relying on your self-sacrifice? Respect is born here, not from drama, not from sacrifice, but from sustained calm. When you stop reacting from hurt and begin responding from clarity, he cannot engage you on the same level as before. And that discomfort, while unsettling, is also awakening. Dignity does not seduce like attachment. Attachment pulls. Dignity leaves a trace, a psychological imprint that lingers long after conversations end. You stop being a romantic memory and become an inner reference, the woman who could not be accessed without alignment. This is where idealization must fall away. Some men grow in response to this. Others withdraw. Both outcomes are truthful. What matters is that you no longer negotiate your center to keep a connection alive. From this place, love stops being an offering and becomes a choice, a shared one or none at all. There is a profound difference between being desired and being respected. Desire can coexist with disregard. Respect cannot coexist with self-betrayal. And the male psyche, even when it resists, always recognizes when it is standing before the latter. In the next part, we enter a more delicate territory. The moment respect begins to transform into something quieter and more volatile. Not fear of losing you, but fear of not being enough to keep you. This is where contradictions appear. Approaches followed by retreats. Silence after intensity. And if you don't understand this phase, you may mistake instability for depth. But if you do understand it, you remain steady, and the reversal completes itself from the inside out. There comes a phase that is rarely spoken about honestly, because it doesn't look romantic and it doesn't feel flattering. Yet it is one of the most revealing moments in the entire dynamic. This is when respect, once awakened, begins to turn into a quiet, destabilizing fear. Not the immature fear of losing you to someone else, but the adult fear of not being enough to remain where he once stood comfortably. At this point, his inner world enters contradiction. He wants to come closer, yet hesitates. He reaches out, then retreats. He offers moments of intensity followed by stretches of silence. From the outside, it looks confusing. From the inside, it is a system trying to reorganize itself without the old support structures it relied on. Your dignity has removed the cushion of your availability. And without that cushion, he is forced to face himself without distraction. Jung described this as the encounter with the unmasked self, the moment when defenses fail and the psyche is left alone with its own limitations. This fear does not announce itself as fear. It appears as ambiguity. Delayed replies, mixed signals, sudden depth, followed by emotional distance. If these are not always games, often they are signs of an identity struggling to recalibrate. What matters most here is not what he does, but what you do not do. This is the stage where many women misread intensity as progress. They see heightened emotion and assume growth. But intensity can be born from anxiety, just as easily as from love. Fear-driven closeness demands reassurance. Respect-driven closeness offers presence. Your role here is not to interpret his behavior. It is to remain anchored. When you don't rush to fill the silence, when you don't soften yourself to reduce his discomfort, something new happens. He encounters his own emptiness, the space he once filled with your emotional responsiveness. This encounter can go in two directions. It can catalyze growth, or it can trigger withdrawal. Both outcomes are information. Neither requires your intervention. Your dignity does not accelerate his process. It reveals it. You will feel the difference. When he approaches from presence, your body relaxes. When he approaches from fear, something feels unstable, unfinished. The nervous system knows before the mind explains. Love that emerges from fear requires constant proof. Love that emerges from respect seeks coherence. And by staying grounded, you become the natural filter that distinguishes between the two without confrontation. At this stage, the reversal is already underway. Before, you were the one measuring time, tone, and effort. Now, it is him. He watches to see if you will become available again, if you will adapt, if the old dynamic can be restored. When it cannot, unease sets in. Not because you are leaving, but because you are no longer dependent. This emotional independence reorganizes his perception of value more than anything else you could do. Jung wrote that authentic desire arises not from possession, but from encounter. Your dignity removes you from the role of emotional object and returns you to the role of subject. You are no longer the one who is always there. You are the one who chooses to be there. This distinction transforms everything. He is no longer relating to your devotion. He is relating to your presence, and presence cannot be taken for granted. This is also a delicate moment for you. His confusion may awaken your old impulse to soothe, to explain, to stabilize the bond. This is where dignity either solidifies or dissolves. If you step back into emotional labor, the system resets. If you remain steady, something deeper installs itself. Not coldness, but clarity. Clarity demands a clearer position from him. Some men rise here. They become more intentional, more emotionally accountable. Others fade. Not because you became unreachable, but because the level of integrity required no longer matches where they are willing to stand. You do not push. You do not threaten. You do not persuade. You simply do not shrink. This is how a bond is redefined without a single argument, because real respect is not negotiated. It is embodied. Notice something crucial. When he begins to change, it is not because you convinced him. It is because your integrity confronted him with himself. And if he does not change, that is not failure. It is clarity. Your dignity saves you from years of emotional confusion. It reveals who can meet you at your level and who could only love you when you made yourself smaller. This truth can hurt initially, but it liberates in ways that are impossible to explain from the outside. In the next part, we enter the point of no return, the moment he understands, at a cellular level, that the version of you who waited, adapted, and overextended herself is not coming back. From here, an inner decision forms, often unconscious, but definitive. And depending on how you hold yourself at that threshold, that decision either becomes the beginning of a mature bond or a clean ending that finally allows peace to settle where tension once lived. There is a moment when uncertainty collapses into knowing. Not spoken, not negotiated, not explained, simply felt. This is when he understands that the version of you who waited, adjusted, and quietly bent to preserve the bond is not returning. And this realization lands with more weight than any argument ever could. He can no longer elicit the same reactions. He can no longer depend on your emotional availability to stabilize his inconsistencies. Something has closed, not out of bitterness, not out of punishment, but out of coherence. And coherence, once embodied, does not reopen itself for comfort. At this stage, his mind stops testing. The subtle probes, the half approaches, the emotional feelers, they lose their purpose. A deeper reckoning begins. What he grieves now is not your absence, but the loss of a dynamic that allowed him to feel secure without effort. This grief is quiet. It rarely expresses itself in words, but it carries a weight that is unmistakable. Because facing a woman who no longer shrinks forces a man to confront his own limits, the places where he chose convenience over presence, habit over growth. Jung referred to this moment as the death of projection. You are no longer carrying his unresolved parts. You are no longer the container for his emotional ambiguity. And when the projection dissolves, only two paths remain: maturation or withdrawal. If he chooses to stay, something fundamental changes in the way he relates to you. He begins to regulate himself. He becomes more attentive, not out of fear, but out of understanding. He measures what he offers because he recognizes that access to you is no longer unconditional. Your dignity has raised the standard without ever demanding it. You are no longer refuge. You are encounter. An encounter requires presence. Not everyone knows how to love from that place. It requires emotional responsibility. It requires meeting another person as an equal, not as a stabilizer. And for those who can, the bond deepens in a way that is no longer driven by anxiety or dependency. If he chooses to leave, the ending is different as well. There is no prolonged drama, no endless rehashing, no emotional bargaining. You do not chase clarity because clarity is already inside you. You do not try to be understood because you have already understood yourself. And that leaves a mark. Even when he leaves, he carries with him an internal reference that cannot be erased, the memory of a woman who did not negotiate her center to be loved. This reference often returns later, when other dynamics fail to satisfy, when comfort without integrity begins to feel empty. This is the point where doubt usually surfaces for you. Was I too firm? Did I expect too much? The answer is simple, though not always easy to accept. Coherence is never excess. Love that survives only when you shrink is not love. It is dependency. Your dignity did not destroy anything of value. It revealed what could not sustain itself at your level. And while letting go can hurt, something deeper begins to settle within you. The constant tension dissolves. The quiet self-betrayal ends. Jung would say, this is where individuation truly begins. You stop defining yourself by being chosen. You define yourself by choosing yourself. This shift transforms every future bond. You no longer love from lack. You love from presence. You are not trying to be enough. You already are. From this place, your energy changes, not louder, not harder, clearer. And clarity alters how others approach you, not through demand, but through recognition. Your dignity becomes a filter. It doesn't exclude, it clarifies. This moment marks a definitive before and after. Whether he returns or not becomes secondary. What matters is that you will never return to the version of yourself who waited for crumbs. This is not victory over another. It is alignment with yourself. You no longer need intensity to feel alive. You no longer need promises to feel grounded. Your calm becomes home. And only someone capable of inhabiting that calm without trying to disrupt it can remain. Many men remember a woman like this, not with longing, but with delayed respect. She becomes the one who showed them a boundary they could not cross, not to punish them, but to reveal themselves. You did not teach through words. You taught through embodiment. This is not hardness. It is rest. You no longer hold what cannot hold you. You no longer translate yourself to be loved. Your dignity did not isolate you. It ordered you. And when you are ordered within, the outside world begins to respond differently. Not always immediately, not always easily, but more truthfully. In the next part, we move beyond reaction and into integration. What happens when dignity is no longer something you activate in response to a wound, but something you live as identity? When your way of loving, choosing, and being chosen rewrites itself from the inside out, this is where love stops hurting and begins to feel real. There is a quiet turning point that arrives when dignity is no longer something you use, but something you are. It is no longer a response to disappointment, nor a defense against being hurt again. It becomes identity. And from this place, your entire way of relating shifts. Without effort, without performance, without explanation. You are no longer acting from memory. You are acting from presence. Your decisions are not designed to create impact. They are designed to maintain coherence. And coherence has a gravity of its own. Your yes carries weight because it is not automatic. Your no rests because it is not charged with resentment. There is no urgency to define the bond because you are already defined within yourself. This internal stability changes how you are perceived. There are no emotional openings through which someone can enter to negotiate your worth. You are not closed. You are clear. And clarity, while simple, is rare. Love stops feeling like a test. You no longer look for signs to feel safe. Your body, your boundaries, your words, and your actions begin to align naturally. This congruence, subtle, steady, and unmistakable, becomes magnetic not through seduction, but through truth. Those who approach feel it. Those who cannot hold it step back quietly. Dignity does not argue. It organizes the field. Something important happens here. You begin to distinguish between presence and performance, between consistency and intensity, between connection and emotional theater. Your system no longer confuses excitement with safety, and this discernment saves you from countless illusions. You do not become demanding. You become precise. Emotional precision is a language understood only by those willing to meet you without games. The rest fall away naturally, without confrontation, without drama. Jung described integration as the end of fragmentation, the moment you stop splitting yourself to maintain connection. That is what you're doing now. You no longer separate what you feel from what you allow. You no longer override intuition to preserve a bond. When a boundary is crossed, your body responds before your mind constructs a narrative. There is no anger. There is graceful withdrawal. This withdrawal does not harden the heart. It protects it. This is often the moment people say, "I don't attract the same kind of partners anymore." And that is exactly the point. You are no longer transmitting from lack. Your dignity has shifted your frequency. You no longer call in those who need to be carried. You call in those who can carry themselves. This does not guarantee abundance. It guarantees quality. Fewer connections, more truth, less confusion, more choice. Your love life simplifies not because you love less, but because you love yourself more. From here, the memory of him loses its grip, not because he was insignificant, but because he is no longer central. You become the center. And from that center, the past reorganizes itself without bitterness. There is gratitude for what was learned, and release for what can no longer continue. There are no emotional debts left open, only inner closure. This is freedom. Not when someone returns, not when apologies arrive, but when you no longer need them to be at peace. This shift is visible even in silence. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop justifying your choices. You simply act in coherence. And coherence becomes your new baseline. Those who arrive too late sense it immediately. There is no accusation, only distance. Dignity does not build walls. It establishes thresholds. And only those who know how to cross without invading are able to enter. When you look back now, something becomes clear. You did not lose love. You gained structure, and structure is what allows love to endure without hurting. Without structure, love spills everywhere and wounds both people. With structure, love contains itself and deepens. Jung would say this is the moment when connection stops being compensation and becomes encounter. Two whole people choosing each other, not needing each other. This is the inheritance of your dignity, not to change others, but to reposition yourself, to step out of being an option and into being a choice. From here, everything reorganizes. Your relationships, your energy, your decisions. You no longer chase. You attract presence. You no longer fear loss. You trust your capacity to choose well. And as the cycle comes to a close, anchor this truth within yourself. Your dignity does not distance you from love. It guides you toward the right kind. It does not make you inaccessible. It makes you authentic. And authenticity is where love stops being a battlefield and becomes a place of rest. From here, you do not go back. Not because you are rigid, but because you are rooted. In the final part, we will close the circle completely. What happens when everything reconfigures from within, when dignity is no longer something you protect, but the ground you stand on? This is where love, choice, and peace finally align. There is a quiet completeness that arrives when everything finally reorganizes from within. You no longer ask yourself what to do so someone will stay. That question dissolves on its own. In its place, another one begins to guide you, calmer, truer, and far more powerful. Does this bond honor who I am now? From this point forward, you no longer act from reaction. You act from identity. Dignity is no longer an idea you remember in moments of pain. It becomes your natural way of being in the world. There is no urgency, no background anxiety, no constant scanning for signs. A steady calm settles into your nervous system, a calm that is no longer negotiable. Something profound happens here. Your body learns that love does not need to hurt to be real. You stop confusing intensity with connection. You stop mistaking sacrifice for commitment. What once felt normal now feels unnecessary. Your inner intelligence sharpens. You recognize alignment and misalignment instantly without needing explanations or closure conversations. Cycles end not through words, but through coherence. And this coherence is felt even in silence. Many men never forget a woman who reaches this place. Not because she was flawless, but because she was whole. Because she did not betray herself to be chosen. Because she embodied, without preaching, what self-respect looks like in real life. Jung said that what is not integrated repeats itself. You ended the repetition. In doing so, you became a reference point, not just for others, but for yourself. Love is no longer a psychological game. There are no tests to pass, no roles to perform, no strategies to maintain interest. There is presence, mutuality, choice, and if mutuality is absent, there is still peace. Your worth no longer depends on being desired. It rests in being true to yourself. This inner loyalty becomes the foundation of every meaningful bond you will ever form. Without it, relationships dissolve into negotiation. With it, alignment becomes possible. Hear this gently. Not everyone can love you from this level, and that is not loss. It is refinement. Your dignity does not exclude. It filters. It allows closeness only with those who can meet you without requiring your self-abandonment. And while the path becomes more selective, it also becomes lighter. Less noise, less confusion, more truth. When you look back now, there is no guilt, only understanding. You understand why you waited, why you adapted, why you gave more than you should have. And you understand why you cannot do that anymore, not because you are cold, but because you have grown. Growth requires the release of old identities. That, too, is love. Carl Jung described individuation as the most courageous act a person can take, becoming who you truly are, even if it means losing bonds built on dependency. You have taken that path. And in doing so, you have changed how you love, how you choose, and how you allow yourself to be chosen. You no longer seek completion. You share from fullness. This is the kind of love that endures because it does not consume. It does not demand. It does not diminish. It rests. If this message reached you, stay with it for a moment. Let it land. If it resonated, support this space. Like the video, subscribe, and share which part spoke to you most. These small actions allow this reflection to reach those who are ready for it. And as you close this chapter, carry this truth with you. Your dignity is not a barrier. It is a lighthouse. It does not chase love away. It guides the right love toward you. Anyone who comes into your life from now on will do so, knowing they cannot take you for granted. Only choose you consciously. That is the difference between a bond that drains you and one that sustains you. You leave here not with techniques, not with rules, but with an embodied truth. You do not need to prove your worth. You do not need to convince anyone to stay. Your presence, aligned, steady, and whole, already says everything. And let this final sentence anchor you going forward, because it defines your new place in the world. I am the boundary that teaches how to love truthfully. HeartSync X.